welcome to Flight Deck Live. I am Tim Capper, along with my co-host Cliffy D. Hey, how are you, buddy?
Good. It was so nice to get some sun today. I feel like I'm glowing a little bit even. So that's summertime for you folks. I mean, that's if there's not a sure sign of summer, we're officially in the month of June. So for all you is it June yet people? It is. So shut the hell up.
That's right. It's gotta be June. Nope, doesn't work the same way. Doesn't work the same way at all.
Doesn't have that same zing to it that it's gonna be May.
Yeah, that little twang to it. Gotta be May. Yeah. Chime in. Well, as obviously since we're live, chime in. Let us know what you guys are thinking. Today was the first day of real. I guess it really is the first day of the 2024 roster for the CFL season. And we were at camp. We were at practice today.
Yes.
And a slight modification with it. So you're gonna, if anybody wants to head out to practice, you need to make sure that you check with the Alouettes on their website, because this year it looks to be a combination of the Annex Field over at the Big O or over at Stade Bear. And Stade Bear, as Cliff and I will attest to today, it's not the easiest place to get out to. But
especially with there's all kinds of construction. There's lots of events. I mean, Montreal in the summertime. I mean, between the construction, the traffic, and everything else, getting out by car is not such an easy feat. But I mean, it is doable. And public transportation out to Stade Bear out in St. Leonard is also a bit of a schlep as well. So I mean, if you're planning to go, and by all means, fans are certainly welcome to go and check it out. It's free. You just show up, grab a seat, and watch these guys do their thing. But my advice to you would be, yes, consult the Alouettes website. Plan early. Plan to leave early, just to make sure you get in there, especially if it's by public transport.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's not a metro station out near it technically, but there is a way to get out there for sure. But obviously we're not here to talk about what we saw today. We're here to talk about the guys that were on the field today. We'll talk more about day one of practice coming up on Wednesday on the podcast. But this being a special episode of Flight Deck Live, we wanted to make sure that we, like we have for the past couple of years, bring in and talk about our reactions to the actual cuts that the Alouettes made, and who made and who didn't make the roster.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and also too, very surprised to see the Alouettes actually released these names yesterday evening. Again, every CFL team had to have the roster submitted to the league by midnight Eastern time last night, and they all did. But also too, the teams are not obligated to let you know when the names are released. Like, they can release that truly at their discretion. And we've seen in the past too, where sometimes we'll get it that Saturday. Sometimes we have to wait till Sunday morning to get it, which I think was the case for Winnipeg and BC today.
Mm-hmm.
They were delayed or whatnot, or again, at their discretion, decided to release the names only a Sunday morning. But all the other teams did release Saturday night who was going to be staying and who was going to be leaving the team.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about it. Cliff, go ahead and start, buddy. Let's go ahead and let's talk about the guys who did not. You know what? Let's talk about the practice roster first, and then we'll talk about the players who were released, because there are some very interesting players who we saw in camp who actually made it to the final cut, didn't make it to the actual active roster yet, as we've seen in past years. A lot of these guys have sooner or later. But let's start with the guys who made the practice roster.
Yeah. And that's one thing you got to remember about the practice roster, folks, is they're on the team. Technically, they are on the team. They are definitely a part of the organization. And essentially, their job is to be ready if their number gets called. If, God forbid, one of the starters goes down to injury, it's these guys that are going to get the tap on the shoulder and say, hey, in you go. It's your time now. It's your time to shine. So you got to make the most of it.
Yeah.
A lot of the names that are on this list are fairly straightforward. Let's start with Miles Brooks, DB from Louisiana Tech. Didn't see a whole lot of him. Like, he wasn't really noticeable in camp sessions itself, but during the 2 preseason games, he definitely made an impact. He definitely showed that, yeah, okay, this guy is definitely worth consideration. So definitely happy with that. Jose, now we can say it properly, Jose Barbon, wide receiver from Temple. He played some pretty outstanding football as well. James Morgan, quarterback from Florida International. We talked about this on the last Flight Deck Live. His performance against Ottawa was, let's be honest, middling. I mean, he did score a touchdown. We'll give him that, but he did rush in for a touchdown. But a lot of his work was good, but not outstanding. Like if I'm Cody Fajardo or Davis Alexander or even Caleb Evans, I'm not looking over my shoulder for this guy. See, and I'm not trying to be disparaging about this. It's just simple the fact of this is his first go around in the CFL, so obviously he's going to have to learn about how the game is played here and just some of those little nuances as well. And I think in time he'll get that, and he'll certainly get every opportunity, especially being coached by Anthony Calvillo.
Yeah.
If you're a young quarterback, I mean, who better to show you the ropes in the Canadian Football League than the GOAT AC, right?
Yeah, exactly. By the way, and with him making the roster, at least the practice squad, we it's something that we did call a couple of weeks ago. With the Alouettes only having four guys in camp, it kind of made sense that we would have it's rather than waiting to have another quarterback for the Owls to sign somebody. He made the roster, and we weren't surprised that he made the roster. So
yeah, in case anyone was also thinking too about Jonathan Senecal, he was only a part of the internship program for young quarterbacks, the youth sports internship program for training camp. Like he was only there to go and learn and be a part of an actual camp atmosphere in a professional setting. But he's going back to school. I think next year after next year he's draft eligible. So will he end up with the Alouettes? Maybe. You never know what's going to happen. But at least he was able to come and get some experience. But no, he's not going to be a part of the roster. He is definitely 100% going back to the Caribbean.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's keep this party going. Stevie Scott III, running back from Indiana, which I'm very happy about because I definitely felt like he ran with purpose. Like he was pretty outstanding in the 2 games that he played, both preseason games that he played in. Got some really nice runs. Definitely, I think is someone that is going to be a part of this team sooner rather than later. I think just the way he was running and how he looked. We were worried about the running back competition going into this season with the departure of William Stanback, but I mean, Walter Fletcher, Jeshua Antwi, Sean Thomas Erlington, like those are your established guys without question.
Yeah.
But someone's going to have to back those guys up. And honestly, you could do far worse than Stevie Scott because he was running angry at a couple times against Ottawa. And listen, that's a good thing. That's what you want to see. You want to see that kind of that oomph, that spark out of someone like that. So definitely very happy to see Scott remain on the roster. Tyjon Lindsay, who was doing return kick duty against Ottawa this past Friday, looked very impressive in his limited outings. He looked absolutely fantastic. Definitely has a nice burst of speed. Very similar to James Letcher Jr., who this time last year was announced as being a part of the practice roster. And look how his career turned out so far in the Canadian Football League. So it really just comes down to opportunity. If God forbid Letcher gets hurt, Lindsay can come in, and I think the Alouettes will not miss a beat when it comes to kick or punt returns.
Yep.
Next on the list, Donald Ventrelli, offensive lineman from North Dakota. Also a solid contributor. O-line's a kind of a tough one, right? Because usually if they do an outstanding play, it's because it's outstandingly bad. And I didn't see any of that from Ventrelli. Like he just came in, did his job, and definitely proved that there's something there. I mean, I think this offensive line currently as it sits for the Alouettes is more than solid. And of course, it's going to be very Canadian heavy as well. But you want to have backups, right? And I think Ventrelli is going to be just fine. I think he's going to have the opportunities, again, to learn and grow in this position. And, maybe if injuries start to pile up, we'll see this guy in the lineup sooner rather than later. Next up, defensive end Jordan Dominic from Colorado. Again, played pretty solid from what I got. So he actually got a couple of nice tackles in this past Friday. Once again, a lot of these guys, we got to see what they were able to do. And as we talked about, Friday's game was definitely an audition for these guys. A chance with the starters not making the trip to Ottawa. A lot of these guys had to come in and just blow the doors off. And I wouldn't say, like guys like Ventrelli or Dominic really blew the doors off, but they got noticed. They made plays happen, and like, oh, okay, we got something here, and that's what you want. You want to find that diamond in the rough. That's where you do it. Is in these preseason games where the starters are sitting and these guys are basically given the opportunity, like, show us what you got, blow us away. And more often than not, the ones that do, the ones that make those outstanding plays, those are the ones who end up on the roster, the practice roster, I should say, and sometimes even the main roster. So next on the list, Latavius Brini. I hope I'm saying that right. Brini, linebacker from Arkansas. I'll be honest, I didn't see too much from him, which means he didn't make any mistakes, but once again, also wasn't outstanding. But I think it was more in the training camp sessions that he must have made some noise, because obviously there's something about this guy that the team likes and have kept him around. So I'm curious to see a little bit more of him in action as the season progresses. Tyson Copeland, who we know has been a member of this team for the past couple of years.
Yep.
Draft pick out of the University of Montreal. Won a Grey Cup with the Alouettes last year. He was on the practice roster for the Owls, and once again on the practice roster for the Owls. So he, again, doing the right things, obviously, to at least be considered for a position on this team one of these days. Next up in the list, Micah Roan, who was, I believe, the 4th round draft pick for the Alouettes in 2024. As we talked about during the draft recap, my God, this kid's got a incredible motor. Like, he plays nasty, and I think the Alouettes know that, realize that, and they had to find a way to keep him on this team. Once again, didn't get to see a whole lot of him in the preseason games, but in his camp sessions, yeah, he was in there grinding and definitely looking not out of place whatsoever. So I'm very happy to see that Micah is still going to be on this team, still going to get the chance to learn. And I know cracking this the defensive line is going to be easier said than done, but once again, if injuries pile up, you just never know when your number is going to be called, so you better be ready. And I got a feeling that Micah will be ready to go if called upon. And now we get into special teamers that are going to be on the practice roster. Jose Maltos, kicker, who we know from last year, going all the way back to training camp last year, the first preseason game, kicking a walk-off field goal for the win in Ottawa, his former team, I should mention. Jose, once again, came in, did a very outstanding job, helped this team win the Grey Cup by just, I think he played 2 games last year where David Cote was injured.
Yeah.
Came in, did an outstanding job, definitely a part of this team, so very happy to see that he's still here. And punter from this year's global draft, Sam Clark, is also now going to be a member of the practice squad. I do find it's interesting, though, that now the Alouettes have 2 place kickers and 2 punters on the roster, one of each on the regular roster and one of each on the practice roster. So I think it's good in the sense that, as we talked about, iron sharpens iron, right? So you got guys that are going to push each other and going to make each other do better. And I think that's good. I think that David Cote, as good as he's been, as solid a contributor as he's been for the Alouettes, it doesn't hurt to have that someone pushing you a little bit harder and make you do better. And I think the same thing for Joseph Zima. Like, he was actually skying some pretty high punts today, Zima was. And
yeah, it was very nice.
I can't help but wonder if maybe just looking over his shoulder, I'm like, oh, there's another Australian kicker here. He could take my job if I start to slack. So if that's the case, if that's what it takes to motivate you, so much the better. And, well, now our global positions are pretty well set. I mean, we've got Joseph Zima already, and now Sam Clark as backup punter. Like, once again, the Montreal Alouettes aren't going to miss a beat when it comes to that particular position.
I thought it was pretty funny, too. If people remember, for the longest period from when the Alouettes returned in 96, Cliff, is that it was always usually one guy only punting, kicking, punting and field goals. And just over the past couple of years, they switched to something that the Owls had not done since the 80s, going with one guy punting and one guy doing field goals. And yet it's now multiplied. You know what I mean? It's because the time that we had Boris Bede, it was a matter of when he was faltering or he didn't look right. There really wasn't anybody to light a fire under his butt. But it seems like Danny Machocha really seems to be knowing what he's doing. Just as you said, guys, if you got to look over your shoulder, knowing that there's a possibility that there's going to be some changes, if you do poorly, why not? If you can do it with every other position on the team, why can't you do it with the punters and the kickers, right?
Absolutely. And you can even go back further. I mean, let's not forget Sean White, when he's on this team, was doing double duties.
Yep.
Damon Duval, Matt Kellett.
Yep.
I mean, these are also guys that it just became expected upon, especially during the Jim Pop era, was why am I going to burn a, a position like whether especially if I can get a national kicker to do both, that frees up another roster spot. That's perfect. Like we'll do that all day long.
Yep.
But
Terry Baker too. Terry Baker also.
So I mean, so this is still relatively new territory for the Alouettes when you think about it. Like to have a separate kicker and a punter, and the fact that we have a national kicker and a global punter is tremendous as far as I'm concerned. Because it, it I think it eliminates a lot of the stress too. Because I mean, doing double duty, it's easier said than done. But God forbid if your kicker gets hurt. I mean, that's your kicker and your punter gone.
Mm-hmm.
Or
remember the time that Damon Duval got kicked out of the game, and I think it was a Ben Cahoon who took over basically his duties. So I mean,
yep.
So I mean, things
but
happen.
Just place kicking though. I think I want to say Marcus Brady ended up being the punter, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I remember him getting.
I think it was back in 2008. I mean, I'm going back a long time here,
and it was here. Folks. I think it's here in Montreal too. It occurred where he got kicked out. So,
yep. Again, as productive as it can be at times to have someone who can do double duties, maybe you're better off just to keep them separate. And the fact that you have two, in my opinion, very solid kickers and two very solid punters in your lineup, that's win-win all day long. I think that's smart roster management, and I think the Alouettes are just going to benefit from that.
Yeah. Now let's before we get to the guys who made the roster, let's talk about the guys who were released, because I know it seems to be, Cliff, across the CFL, it's been a huge topic of these guys who have not made the roster, or the guys who were cut. Obviously I'll use what we found out last night, what happened in Edmonton. With a very popular kicker in Dean Faithful. But it's been across the league when you've seen these guys who have been released, and really, if we were to look at the guys who were released, there were quite a few names that we had been watching quite a bit over the during camp, but some of them really stood out. And I think one of them, that if you looked at the changes, the list this morning, or you saw them last night online, the biggest one was originally off-season free agent signing Tevin Jones, wide receiver out of Memphis. Something that you and I had talked about recently, where he just seemed to just disappear in the preseason. And I said he came in as a potential replacement for Austin Mack. But man, there, you and I were talking about it today at practice, is that what could have been the causes of him getting released. Obviously, we know some of these guys who made the team. We'll talk about them in a couple of minutes. Kind of makes sense now how these guys did. But thoughts about Tevin Jones and being released?
Yeah, I mean that was the big scuttlebutt coming out during the offseason when the Alouettes signed him in free agency. It sucks to lose an Austin Mack to the NFL. There's no question about that. Especially replacing him is just not so easy. Because let's not forget he inadvertently had replaced Eugene Lewis, who left in free agency the year before. And so as soon as Austin Mack decided to take his talents south, the question was going to be who's going to replace him, who's going to slot into that spot, that American receiver spot for to join this team. And Tevin Jones looked like a great option. Like, wow, okay, he very solid contributor for the Saskatchewan Roughriders during his time there. He also worked with Jason Moss. He worked with Cody Fajardo. Like, these guys know him. I thought, okay, well, this is great. I mean, this is someone who gets the quarterback, gets the coach, and those guys get him as well. So, I mean, I thought this would be, like a no-brainer as far as I was concerned. But honestly, aside from a couple of decent plays in training camp sessions, I struggled to think of times where I thought, oh my God, that's Tevin Jones. Oh boy. Like, that was it.
Because we were saying that about other wide receivers. That was the issue, I think.
Yep. There's a lot of receivers that just simply put stood head and shoulders above Tevin Jones. And Jones, I mean, both preseason games was a ghost. I mean, I don't know how much, I don't recall how much attention he got, if any. I mean,
Yeah.
And it can go one of two ways. You can either think, okay, well, his spot is safe, so maybe they just want to focus on other receivers and see what's doing. Like, what do they have in those guys? Because again, Tevin Jones is an established CFLer, or he's just not getting open. He's not getting considered because maybe he's just not on the same page as whoever the quarterback is and the other receivers. I mean, it can go one of two ways, and the only person who can truly answer that would be Tevin Jones, and also to the coaching staff, who
Yep.
ultimately made the decision to let him go. Definitely surprising, but once again, it's pretty evident the receivers that are in camp, both on the regular roster and the practice roster. Simply put, they played much better than what Jones did. So, I mean, just because you've got experience doesn't mean anything. Like, if you don't, you still have to show up to camp. You still have to,
Yeah.
you got to wow everybody still. I mean, and that goes for everybody. I mean, I think aside from Cody Fajardo and Tyson Philpott and Marc-Antoine Dequoy, I think everybody else's job, I wouldn't say is in danger necessarily, but nobody is 100% safe when it comes to training camp.
Yeah.
Tevin Jones, unfortunately, he learned that the hard way. That you were okay in Saskatchewan. You played decently enough there, and you clearly were good enough to get noticed and signed in Montreal. But you can't just go based off what you did back in the day. You got it's what have you done for me lately? That's pretty much what it is, and that's what training camp is what have you done for me lately? And essentially,
Actually, training camp is what have you done for me now?
That's true. That's true.
You know what I mean? So, I mean,
I guess the best way or another way to put it would be you're only as good as your last play. And as I said, I struggle to think of any outstanding plays that Tevin Jones did. Like, there was a couple I do remember. Like, oh, okay, but that's it. I mean, you can't get by just on one or two plays.
No,
no, you just can't. I'm sorry. So
yeah,
that.
Let's look at the other guys who were released, and then we'll talk about if we have any thoughts on any particular people. We get the Jason Adamolia, defensive tackle from Notre Dame. Frederick Antoine, a national wide receiver from Laval. Ja'Kai Baker, offensive lineman from South Alabama. Kervon Bennett, defensive end from Arkansas State. Ramad Jackie Bowman, wide receiver out of Northwestern. Macon Clark, defensive back out of Tulane. Nicholas Gendron, wide receiver out of Ottawa. Michael Herzog, running back out of Hillsdale College. Tyrone Howell, wide receiver out of Louisiana Monroe. Maxime Lavallee, a defensive back out of Laval. Aaron Lynch, a defensive end out of South Florida. Oh boy. Finny Major, I'm so sorry. Defensive tackle out of Rutgers. Darian McKenzie, a defensive back out of Merrimack. Smoke Monday, best name on the roster, but not on the roster anymore. Linebacker out of Auburn. Jalen Moody, linebacker out of Alabama. T.J. Moultrie, a defensive end out of Auburn. Tanner Nemes, fullback out of Wilfrid Laurier. Jason, was it Turnitine? Offensive lineman from Florida State, and then Jalen Wayne, a wide receiver out of South Alabama. I think for me, obviously, is Ramad Jackie Bowen. He is a guy, Cliff, who stood out quite a bit in the very first preseason game, but he was invisible in the second. I mean, the only time he got one target in the second, got called for a penalty. I don't know if it's because of the quarterbacks that were playing, or just a matter of that another wide receiver did a lot better than he did. Which was going head to head with him in those two games, and he just didn't do that well in the second game versus Ottawa. But he showed promise. He showed promise, but I mean, it's, as you said, sometimes one game you can, wow the world, and the next game, meh.
Well, again, no better example of what have you done for me now? Or you're only as good as your last play. And yeah, I mean, again, as a wide receiver, you kind of need the quarterback to find you a little bit, and you also got to make yourself noticeable as well. You got to do something to stand out and get yourself open. as a receiver, for example. I mean, you got to find a way to make a play happen, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out for Ahmad to end up being even on the practice roster or
Yeah.
anywhere on this team. It's unfortunate, but yeah, as we talked about, there were a lot of receivers that really did stand out in a huge way. I mean, again, if you're not keeping Tevin Jones because he wasn't doing very much, then I think that was kind of the bar being set as far as as far as receiver production goes for this Alouettes team and what they're looking for going into 2024. It's just one of those unfortunate circumstances. Definitely a nice guy. We got a chance to get to know him a little bit throughout training camp, but he was good, but unfortunately just not good enough. And you can say that about a lot of these players too. Another receiver that I'm a little surprised got cut was Frederick Antoine, because again, draft pick for the Alouettes this year, a Laval player, so a Quebec-born player, someone that you'd think, okay, well, Danny Machocha loves drafting all the French Canadians. I'm like, well, yeah, he will give them the opportunity, but at the same time, you got to stand out. And unfortunately, Antoine really didn't stand out. I mean, a couple of the plays that I saw him involved in, like there was just nothing there. Like it was just obviously you can't help being overthrown. Like the ball's overthrown to you, you can't help that. But there's also I couldn't recall any major instances where he really stood out. Like, oh, okay, wow. There was none of that from Frederick Antoine, unfortunately. In fairness, though, Kevin Meitel, who was drafted by the Argos and a teammate of Antoine's, there was so much hype between both of those guys going into the draft because they figured, okay, two outstanding receivers from the University of Laval that won the Vanier Cup in 2022. You figure, okay, this is going to be this could potentially be a 1-2 punch. Like even some people were hoping that the Alouettes would draft Meitel and Antoine and let them be the receiving stars of the future for this team. But I mean, there's not that big of a need for national receivers, unfortunately. So I think for Antoine, like he would have had to blown the doors off of everybody in every session that he was in every game situation that he was in. And simply put, he didn't do that. So that's one of the reasons why he's out the door, which I'm sure would shock a lot of people just because I can't believe the Alouettes let a French-Canadian player go. But them's the breaks, unfortunately. Like you want to put together the best roster possible, regardless of where you're coming from. All Danny Machocha is going to do, he will open the door for you, but you got to walk through it. Simply put.
Yeah, the other two names too that I think both of us were surprised about was Michael Herzog out of Hillsdale, and Smoke Monday, and then Jalen Wayne, another wide receiver there. I think those are a couple of players that we were surprised. I mean, Smoke is still a great name, man. What a great name!
Like the marketing potential of a name like that. Like I keep talking about you don't want this smoke. And I guess in a way, the Alouettes didn't want this smoke either. So, it's too bad, though. I mean, even the last name Monday is good, but then again, also too, remember the song by the Boomtown Rats? I don't like Mondays, so I guess the Alouettes don't like Mondays
either. Or the Bangles and Manic Monday.
So there was potential there, but lo and behold, it just wasn't meant to be for Mr. Monday.
Yeah, exactly. Any of the comments other than the other two that I mentioned on? Any one that really stood out to you?
Well, Michael Herzog, as I said, I've seen some of his film, and yeah, like I thought he was definitely going to get a chance. He was a late addition to camp because he was attending the mini camp for the Detroit Lions. I thought, okay, well, if an NFL team is giving him attention, then there's definitely something there. There's definitely something there in his draft film. I mean, the guy just has great burst. I mean, he definitely is fast, but also too, he's very short. I mean, by running back and returner standards, he's short. I think he's even shorter than James Letcher Jr., if you can believe that.
Really?
So, I think so.
Letcher's a tiny dude. Oh, so is Tyler Snead.
Yep. But again, those guys somehow are able to make outstanding plays happen. And Michael Herzog, yeah, he's got a couple of nice runs here and there, but once again, was simply outran essentially by Stevie Scott. I mean, that's the unfortunate part. And
so many running backs in camp.
Well, that's it. We talked about this. There would be a competition, just like last year. It was all about trying to find the next great wide receiver for the Alouettes. This year, it was about who's going to replace William Stanback, who's going to be the next great running back for the Montreal Alouettes. And Michael Herzog could have been in that conversation as well, and I think in some instances he was, but once again, he did okay in camp, but okay is not going to be good enough to make the roster clearly, especially considering this is a championship roster that you're trying to be a part of. Like you can't turn in an okay effort. They're not drafting you for your okayness, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Now you and I kind of joked about this, but it is actually a pretty valid point. We were trying to determine, and I think you said this to me yesterday, is that who is going to become potentially the Alouettes 2024 version of Reggie Stubblefield. And just in case, for those who don't remember, just give a quick Cliff Notes, no pun intended, of the story of Reggie Stubblefield.
Yeah, Reggie Stubblefield was, this time last year, he was one of those final cuts and was told, we want to keep you. We got to give. There's 2 or 3 other guys that are on the roster that we got to give the opportunity to first. But stay ready, because the minute somebody goes down to injury, we're calling you. And that's exactly what happened with Reggie. Funny fact, he was this close to becoming a member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but he loved Montreal. He loved the culture. He loved everything about the Alouettes organization, and he really wanted to play for the Alouettes. So he basically forced the Alouettes' hand, because he said, listen, I've got an offer here from the Blue Bombers. Do you want me? Yes or no? And sure enough, the Alouettes, they found a way. They brought him back. And I mean, folks, I don't have to tell you what an outstanding season he had last year. And I was wondering, like, one of the things I said to Tim was, okay, we take a look at the cuts. Is there somebody on this cut list that could be the next Reggie Stubblefield, in the sense that they just barely got beat out for a job, and were they told to keep their cell phone charged and make sure they're ready to go, just in case there's a couple of injuries that start to pile up? When I look at this list, I mean,
there are a few. Ramad easily could be one of them. Easily. So could smoke. So could, you know what? I think just to tie this into a bow, so we can get onto the active roster and the guys who did make it, is keep that page bookmarked. Keep it bookmarked on the guys who did not make the roster now, and let's see what happens a couple of weeks down the line. That's all. I think that's all we can really say. So,
yeah, I think it's funny though, because you've got Kevon Bennett and Maxime Lavallee, 2 guys who were also practice roster guys last year, and unfortunately, it didn't last too long for them. Unfortunately, could one of them be possibly the next Reggie Stubblefield Jr.? Always a possibility. You mentioned Ramad. That's a good possibility as well. I mean, it really does come down to opportunity more than anything else, and exactly. that's really what it came down to for Reggie Stubblefield, was the fact that guys like Ciante Evans, J.R. Reed, Najee Murray, those guys, and Nafis Lyon too. Those guys got hurt. Like, all of a sudden, your top defensive stars just dropping like flies, and then someone's got to step up. KB Nento was one of those guys who stepped into the role, and took him a little while, but he eventually flourished and became, an integral part of this Alouette secondary. And same thing for Reggie Stubblefield. He like I said, in a way, he kind of forced their hand a little bit. Like he said, listen, if you want me and I want to be there too, it's got to happen now, because I've got an offer, and I if you don't want me, I'll go to Winnipeg. And could you imagine? Can you imagine if Reggie did actually go to Winnipeg, especially with the way the Grey Cup lined up?
I know.
I mean,
Mari Alfred. I don't think Danny Mac wanted another one of those on his hands. But anyway, I digressed.
So that's just it. So again, for any of these guys that are on this cut list, and no doubt they're feeling discouraged, that I'm sure a lot of them did give their best effort, and sometimes your best effort isn't good enough. But it really does come down to opportunity. Like, just the best thing you can do, if you don't land on someone else's roster or practice roster or what have you, just stay ready. Stay ready, because you really, truly never know when the opportunity is going to come. You never know. We could lose a whole bunch of receivers, and then all of a sudden the Alouettes are forced to call back like a Nicolas Gendreau or Ramad Chakio Bowman and say, hey, we need someone who can catch a ball. get up here.
Exactly. You tweeted out earlier today on socials, but let's talk about the new guys who did make the roster. And if they did change their numbers, Cliff, make sure you do include those too, by the way, if you can, bud, because I know it, we checked the rosters earlier this morning. They hadn't made the modifications. Some actually did change their numbers. So, you will need a scorecard at least for a week to decide, to see what these new numbers are. So who are these guys that are now new to the nest in the in the Alouettes?
Yeah, and interesting to note, players I'm about to mention who did change their numbers are on the active roster, with the exception of Jose Barbon. Jose was actually rocking the 81, formerly worn by Austin Mack, but now that he's a member of the organization, full tilt, he's actually switched to number 80. So I don't know if 81 is just in case things don't work out. Maybe Austin makes his way back, because he's going to want that 81 back. So maybe I don't know. We'll see what happens. Bryce Cosby, who, wow, this guy was really outstanding in training camp sessions and in his 2 preseason games that he played. This guy was all over the field. He was definitely a force. So I'm very happy that he made the main roster. He has now switched to number 30, formerly worn by Chandler Worthy, who, another guy that we would have loved to seen stay on board, but I mean, can't stop progress, unfortunately.
Yep.
Arthur Hamlin was wearing number 21 throughout training camp, but unfortunately, Sean Thomas Erlington is wearing 21 and is an established veteran, so obviously he gets the nod for that. So now Arthur Hamlin is going to be wearing number 33. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Arthur Hamlin wore number 3 in college. So number 3 is being worn by Regis Sibasu this year. So if you can't get number 3, then go with 33. So 2 3s.
There you go.
That's a good compromise, I think. And last but certainly not least, I'll say the darling of training camp and preseasons for the Montreal Alouettes, Charleston Rambo, who I think truly is the reason why Tevin Jones was shown the door and a lot of these other receivers were shown the door, because this guy played his ass off. I mean, he was making outstanding catches left, right, and center. He's got all the measurables that this team is looking for when it comes to receiver. I mean, this dude is something special for sure. He was wearing 76 throughout training camp, and we always joke about how the 70s numbers are like the kiss of death. Like, if you wear those, you're probably not going to stick around, but sometimes you do. Like, look at Shedler Furvius last year was wearing number 70 in training camp. He made the roster. He made the practice roster, I should say. First thing he did, switched his number. He took over Geno Lewis's 87. So I didn't think Charleston was going to keep number 76. I think it was just, okay, we don't know you from a hole in the wall, so here, take this number and wear it. And make the team. If you don't like the number, make the team, and then we'll give you a better number. Yeah. Lo and behold, Tevin Jones was wearing a 14 in training camp because that was his number in Saskatchewan. And
I forgot about that. Oh, man.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as we came to today, we saw, who's number 14 running? Could that be Rambo? I actually heard someone scream out, "Hey, Rambo, that 14 looks good on you." I'm like, okay, that answers that question.
It was gone and yoink.
Well, that's just it, right? You make the team, you get to have a better number, simply put. And I guess 14 is going to suit Rambo a lot better than what 76 did. So
yeah. We did mention too, by the way, is that we were, if you missed at the beginning, we were at practice today, first day practice, leading up to the game versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on Thursday. We're not going to go into that into this special broadcast of Flight Deck Live. We're going to save that for what we saw, and I guess we'll see the practice participations, et cetera, because there were guys missing today. But we will be talking about more of the game prep and stuff like that on the show on Wednesday, because we got to preview a game. We wanted to give the roster its due and talk about everything leading up to the game. That's going to be this Thursday.
Absolutely. Again, this is it's a fun time of year in the sense that we know that football is on the horizon. It's about to get real, as they say. But we know it's also tough for the players that get cut. And whether it's just with the Alouettes or any other team, it's not fun getting cut. It's tough. Like, you feel bad, especially you get invested in players, and whether it's rookies that you've heard a lot of good things about and you want to see how they are in a professional setting, or established veterans that for whatever reason just don't have that same juice anymore. It's tough. It's not fun getting cut. I again, my heart does go out to these guys, but it's all about opportunity, right? I mean, like you're only as good as your last play. Unfortunately, when it comes to the game of football, it's what have you done for me now, as you so eloquently put, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys will probably end up on different rosters. Even the Alouettes could probably taken a look at some of the cuts that were made from other teams, and like, I bet he'd be a good fit here. It's just a matter now of, okay, who you've got on your practice roster, who you've got on the injured list, which we won't know probably until Wednesday when the depth chart comes out. Because as you alluded to, a lot of there was a couple of noticeable players that didn't take the field today. Could they end up on the 6-game list or even the 1-game list? And if so, does that open up a spot for maybe a very late addition to the roster? We won't know until later this week, I guess. But I mean, there's definitely lots of opportunity out there. A lot of good players are now kind of on the outside looking in. I have no doubt in my mind a lot of them will end up on different rosters as teams try to fill needs that maybe they thought they had the right combination in training camp and throughout the preseason, but for whatever reason it's just not clicking. So so and so is free. Let's bring him in. Let's give him a look, see what's doing. And more often than not, that's usually what happens. I mean, I think about Sean Lemon last year. He was he was cut by the BC Lions, sat by the phone for the first what was it 5-6 weeks of the season until before Montreal came calling.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the season he had. We still have the UFL going on right now as well. Darnell Sankey last year won. Well, it was back when it was the XFL. Won the championship with them. All of a sudden, he got the itch. He wanted to come back and play in the CFL. Montreal came calling. Look what Darnell Sankey did leading up to and including the Grey Cup. I mean, there's tons of opportunities out there. There's tons of players out there that could end up becoming a part of this team or any other team in the Canadian Football League. It really just comes down to opportunity. When is that opportunity going to present itself? And if it does, are you going to be able to take advantage of it and make the most of it?
Yep, exactly. So as I said, you know that we now know who's on the 2024 roster for the Montreal Alouettes. If you're curious to know about any more of the guys, you can head over to the Alouettes website to check out the press release or just check out the main roster. Again, we will be back on Wednesday to preview the season kickoff for the Montreal Alouettes versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the Grey Cup rematch. I'll leave it at that. But that will be happening on Thursday. But make sure you do join us on all of our socials and however you can find the podcast coming up this Wednesday. So X, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. YouTube. We appreciate everybody who's joined us for this special broadcast of Flight Deck Live. Stay tuned for, as I said, for the show on Wednesday, and also stay tuned for us for the next episode of Flight Deck Live, which will be occurring post game of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers Alouettes matchup on Thursday. So for everybody here at the Alouettes Flight Deck, for Cliffy D, I'm Tim Capper. I'll talk to you soon.